Good afternoon, everyone. My name is McNeil and I'm a six-year pupil here at Brace High School and I'm ambassador for the Rights Respecting School. We've got a really good event coming up for you today, and the Rights Respecting School class alongside the BYT have worked really hard in putting this together. So on the 27th of January 1945, the notorious death camp Auschwitz was liberated. That date has become synonymous with Holocaust Memorial Day. 14 years later, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration of Human Rights of the Child. 4 decades after that, in 1989, the most complete statement of children's rights were produced. So going forward from that, in 2016, Brace High School began its own Rights Respecting School journey. So our event this year is focusing on two genocides. So we're looking at the Holocaust, and we're also looking at a more recent one of Srebrenica. And alongside that, we'll be looking at the different rights of the child and how they were abused in this time. Inspired by the Holocaust Educational Trust, the theme, The Power of Words, we've focused our event on the impact words can have in the world and the extent that these can all go to. This event is all created by the Rights Respecting School Senior Group, and all the performances you'll see today have been worked out and conducted by the Brace Youth Theatre Senior Group. Today we've also got Kaylee Graham and Luke Kirby, who are our Holocaust Education Trust ambassadors, and they're going to speak of their personal experiences whilst they visited Auschwitz, and in their time in Poland they also met a survivor, so they'll be talking about their experiences with that. And today we're also delighted to welcome Mr. Robert McNeil, MP, who worked as a forensic technician in Bosnia after the Srebrenica genocide, as our keynote speaker. So please sit back, get comfortable and prepare to be informed and educated by members of Brace High School, Rights Respecting School class and the BYT Theatre. Thank you.
The term genocide did not exist before 1944. In 1944, a Polish-Jewish lawyer, Raphael Lemkin, coined the term genocide and defined it as a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups, with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. He formed the word by combining geno from the Greek meaning family with side from the Latin for killing. There are 10 stages of genocide.
I'm Jewish. Being German was only part of my identity. The Nazis made me a Jew.
I'm Muslim. Croatian Serbian nationals were based on NKTB. The Serbian media have called me Islamic fundamentalists.
Symbolization. People are made to wear something to show that they are different.
I was forced to wear the yellow star.
I was forced to wear the white armband.
Discrimination. A dominant group uses the law, political power and customs to refuse the rights of other groups.
The Nuremberg laws in 1935 deprived me of my citizenship and civil rights.
As a Bosnian Muslim, I was not permitted to register on the census in my own right until 1971.
Dehumanization. The humanity of one group is refuted by the other.
I'm referred to as vermin, a parasite, and filth. I'm Judenschwein, Blutmenschen, a Jew victim and subhuman.
Serbian politician made an announcement. He said it was genetically deformed material that embraced Islam, and through the centuries it degraded further. I am a genetic mutation.
Organization. Careful planning takes place. Training begins at a young age.
I am a member of the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth. I was a friendly honour of the Third Reich. Their violence if necessary.
I'm a member of the Parliamentary Unit. I'm a Scothead. I'm a member of a unit that killed 6 young Muslim men. We filmed it.
Polarization. Propaganda is used to spread ideas.
The Nazis used the newspaper Der Stürmer to spread and incite messages of hate about my people, the Jewish people.
Bosnian Serbs were told they needed to defend themselves against slaughter and rape from us, their Bosnian Muslim neighbours.
Preparation. People are indoctrinated with fear and suspicion of the victim group.
If we don't kill them,
They will kill us.
Persecution. Victims are identified and separated because of their religion or ethnic identity.
I was sent to the Warsaw Ghetto. 400,000 of us were sent to the Warsaw Ghetto. In the summer of 1942, I was one of 254,000 Jews sent to the Srebrenica concentration camp. I survived.
50 years later, the international community was shocked by images from a Marska concentration camp. Conditions were horrific. Starvation, beatings, interrogations, mass murder and sexual violence. I survived.
Extermination. Victims are murdered.
The day, 20th of January 1942. The place, the 1C conference outside Berlin. The decision, the final solution, a euphemism for the planned annihilation of 11 million Jews. In historian Mark Grossman's words, euphemisms were the Nazis' normal mode of communicating about murder. 6 extermination camps were established, the most notorious of which was Auschwitz. 6 million were murdered. 1.5 million of them were children.
Mass killings of Bosnian Muslims happened from the onset of the war. As early as 1993, the former president of the United Nations Security Council argued that a slow-motion genocide of Bosnian Muslims was taking place. The international community failed to heed these warnings, leading to the events of the Srebrenica in July 1995. To date, Srebrenica is the only specific incident of mass murder of Bosnian Muslims that has been formally recognised as a genocide by the international courts.
Denial. The perpetrators and future generations deny the event.
Despite thousands of survivors of Auschwitz provide eyewitness accounts, despite thousands of memoirs, documents, despite thousands of photographs and material object remains from the camps, Holocaust denial exists.
Despite the survivors, despite their accounts, despite the stories, despite the video evidence, despite the overwhelming forensic evidence, despite the court judgments to the contrary, denial persists.
When I grow up and reach the age of 20, I'll set out to see the enchanting world. I'll take a seat in a bird with a motor. I'll rise and soar high into space. I'll fly, soar, and hover over the lovely, faraway world. I will soar over rivers and oceans. Skyward shall I ascend and blossom. A cloud, my sister, the wind, my brother.
I'll marvel at you facing McNeil, of ancient Egypt, of the pyramids and the Sphinx. I'll fly over Niagara Falls and immerse myself into the searing Sahara dune. I'll drift over the dune cliffs of Tibet. I'll extricate myself into the scorching, terrifying whale heat, meander over the icebergs of the north.
By wind I'll cross the great Kangaroo Island and the ruins of Pompeii and the holy lands of the Old Testament and over the lands of the renowned Homer. I'll fly slowly, slowly, hovering lazily, and thus basking in the enchantments of this world. I will soar skywards, a cloud, my sister, the wind, my brother.
Smaller I got angry and attacked. Capitals were standing for the SS women. They wielded great power. There was silence. Would she send me to my death? If she had denounced this to the authorities, it could have been the end for me. But she gave the child an additional piece of bread, and from then on she respected me. I never had any more problems with her.
The cherished objects that we have brought with us were left behind in the train, and with them, at last, our illusions. Every 2 yards or so, an SS man held a Tommy gun trained to us. Hand in hand, we followed the crowd. An SS non-commissioner officer came.
Men to the left, women to the right.
8 words, spoken quietly, indifferently, without emotion. 8 short, simple words. Yet, that was the moment when I parted from my mother. I had not had time to think, but already I felt the pressure of my father's hand. I walked on, my father still holding my hand. I'm not quite 15 yet.
No. 18.
But I'm not!
Phil, listen to what I say.
So this is where we're going. I didn't understand. I didn't understand how they could burn people, how they could burn children, and for the world to keep silent. Never shall I forget that night, the first in the camp, which turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget the little faces of the children whose bodies were burnt into wisps of smoke beneath a blue sky. Never shall I forget that smoke that consumed my faith forever.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the UN General Assembly on the 10th of December 1948, was a result of the experience of the Second World War. With the end of that war and the creation of the United Nations, the international community vowed never to allow atrocities like those of that conflict to happen again.
There were already patrols around the area, and I'd asked people to surrender their weapons at the time. Villages around us were burning. We were scared for our lives. On the 12th of May, we finally had to leave. My husband and his family, me and my 2-year-old baby. As I had just given birth, I could hardly walk. I begged them to leave me behind. They did not risk their lives. To take my baby and to leave me behind. My husband said to me,
I will carry you. I will not leave you.
22 days later, this couple was we reached our next son. In 1983, the UN declared Srebrenica safe. We felt some relief. The UN would protect us. At least some of our suffering would end. We wouldn't be hungry. We wouldn't be fired. We trusted in the forces. betrayed us. In July 1995, search and firing the weapons of peace. Masses of people began moving from Srebrenica to Pupils. We reached my partner's place at the gas station. My husband picked me up. I never saw him again. I'll never forget that scene at the gas station. Men started heading and pulling through the woods under heavy fire. My daughter was 3 years old. Her shoes were filled with blood and blisters, but she didn't cry. She didn't say much. I was carrying my 14-month-old son. I slipped and dropped in the ash pile. I wasn't giving any signs of life. So my mother took a bottle of water and sprayed it. We began saying putting women and children onto trucks. Serving soldiers in the cafeteria. Many men were taken. The war affected me a lot. We killed most of my family, over 20 close relatives of mine. In 2003, my husband was released by the He destroyed entire generations. They took my youth, my joy, my home, my job. They took everything, and they could. They took all my human rights.
It was late at night when we had to move. The UN soldiers says they would help, but by nightfall there was nothing. UN soldiers abandoned their positions, retreating without resistance. They made Bosniak soldiers hand over their weapons. I was with my twin brother Hussein and my father. We knew that if we wanted to survive, then we would have to join a column. We were on a hill when we were sorted into the column. There was onslaught of gunfire. Their primary concern was that we were Muslim. It was coming from every angle. So we had to push forward. Forward was freedom. Forward was survival. If we did not push forward, follow right in, we would not see the wave of men ahead. It was then that I realised we had lost my brother, my father, and my uncle. I knew if I was to go back, I would have survived. But eventually, I got to the free territory of Srebrenica. I was shocked. I survived.
I have chosen to tell my story anonymously and under an assumed name. I was 15 years old when the war began. One night, I was woken by explosions and shootings. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. My sister and I ran to our parents' room. No one knew what was going on. When it got light, we left our home and met other Bosnian Muslims who were heading to Medin for safety. We didn't have any food, so in the early morning we would go to the village to find some. That's where we were captured and taken to the mining company's head office, where there were other Bosnian Muslim prisoners. My father asked, "What is this about, my neighbour? What is it?" Our neighbour pretended as if he didn't even know us. He was armed, so we followed him to the mining company's head office, where there were other Bosnian Muslims. They took 9 of us, mainly girls, and that's where the nightmare began. 3 of us were driven to an abandoned house, and that night, we were raped. I was raped by 1 soldier, the other 2 girls raped by 2 soldiers. The next day, they sent someone else to guard us. We stayed up all day until eventually someone allowed us to go to bed. Not long after we went to lie down, we heard noises. yelling, knocking, walking up the stairs. Suddenly someone began to bang on the door of the room we were in, but we didn't dare to get up. A soldier broke the door down. There were about 11 there who had just arrived. We were driven to another house, and that night I was raped by several soldiers, some of which I knew, some were strangers to me. It lasted the whole night. Women suffered from all kinds of torture during this war. Women are courageous as mighty dragons because even after all this, we are still fighting to live a normal life.
After World War II, European children faced famine and disease. UNICEF was created in December 1946 by the United Nations to provide them with food, clothing and health care.
In 1959, the UN General Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, which defined children's rights to protection, education, healthcare, shelter and good nutrition.
In 1989, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted by the UN General Assembly. It is the most complete statement of children's rights ever produced and is the most widely ratified international human rights treaty in history.
The former Yugoslavia had signed and ratified the Convention on the 26th of January 1990 and the 3rd of January 1991, respectively. There are 4 articles in this convention that are seen as special. 1. Non-discrimination, Article 2. 2. Best interests of the child, Article 3. 3. Right to life, survival and development, Article 6. 4. Right to be heard, Article 12. Each one of these rights for children were abused in the former Yugoslavia.
We are a rights-respecting school. We do not accept prejudice, discrimination or hate. We are the future. Our words have power.
Many thanks to the BYT performance. Can I ask you to just clap your hands and give them another round of applause? Thank you to the BYT. So, as I said earlier, we've got our speakers. So, please welcome Kaylee Graham and Luke Kirby, who are part of the Holocaust Educational Trust, and they're the ambassadors for the school this year, 2017 and 2018. Thanks.
The Holocaust Educational Trust was established in 1988. Their aim is to educate young people from every background about the Holocaust and the important lessons to be learned for today. The Trust works in schools, universities and in the community to raise awareness and understanding of the Holocaust. Luke and I are 2 of 27,000 Holocaust Educational Trust ambassadors. We have heard the first-hand testimony of a Holocaust survivor, visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, where over 1 million people were murdered, and we are now trying to share that experience in our local community. Since 1999, the Holocaust Educational Trust have worked to send both students and teachers to Auschwitz. The trip is based on the premise, hearing is not like seeing, and aims to educate about the relevance of the Holocaust and give people something that a textbook or a teacher never could. An orientation seminar takes place 2 days before the trip, where we listen to survivor Eva Clark talk about her experience. Eva started her story by telling us about the birth of her brother Dan. He was conceived within Theresienstadt around 1942, when the Nazis discovered Eva's mother Anka was pregnant. A document was signed to say that the baby had to be handed over at birth and euthanized. However, her brother died of pneumonia early on in his life. Anka was sent from Auschwitz from the 10th of October 1944, where she volunteered to be sent there with her husband. However, he was shot and killed. Anka was then transferred to Mauthausen camp,
and the stress brought on early labour. She gave birth to her daughter Eva Clark in Mauthausen concentration camp, Austria, on the 29th of April 1945. Eva only weighed 3 pounds. Eva's whole family were murdered within Auschwitz-Birkenau, and her mother and her were the only two to survive. The gas chamber in Mauthausen was blown up on the 28th of April 1945, just 1 day before Eva was born. Had they not been blown up, both Eva and her mother would have been killed. We then visited Poland for our 1-day trip to Auschwitz-Birkenau expeditions. During the visit itself, we were taken to Auschwitz, the town where Auschwitz concentration camp and death camps were located, and where the local Jewish community lived prior to the start of the Second World War. We were then shown several barracks at Auschwitz I, where we were shown registration documents of inmates, piles of hair, shoes, clothes, and other items seized from the prisoners as they entered the camps. We were then taken to Birkenau. This is the site that most people associate with the word Auschwitz, and this is where the vast majority of the victims were murdered. Here, the remains of the barracks, crematoria and the gas chambers. The tour of Birkenau culminated in the ceremony held to the destroyed crematoria. The ceremony included readings, a moment's reflection, and ended with us lighting candles and placing them on the train tracks. Lastly, we had a follow-up seminar in order to discuss our feelings after the emotional trip. Within this seminar, we decided to discuss the ways we could make our local community more aware of genocide and discuss parts of the trip that hit us hardest. For me, it was seeing all the suitcases, as it gave a name and address to the millions of Jews, Gypsies and other groups who were targeted during this time. This trip was very emotional and taught us a lot of things. The Holocaust Educational Trust take in the emotional impact of this trip and offer support for all the ambassadors who do take part.
It is incredibly difficult for those who have never been to Auschwitz or similarly other death camps that existed at the time to comprehend the emotions and thoughts that the camps provoke. As such, it is incredibly important for those who have visited Auschwitz, like Kayleigh and I, to share the emotions that many felt while being toured around the camp, and subsequently the impact that it left on us on our return home. As we in the Holocaust Educational Trust believe that through sharing our experiences we are more able to show the importance of remembering such events as the Holocaust. One of the main emotions that many people believe those who attend Auschwitz will feel are those of dread, or in fact a lingering fear of the events that took place. But at the beginning of our tour, as we were taken through the iconic gates of Auschwitz I that held the words Arbeit macht frei, there was no such moment. I believe that through media such as pictures, books and indeed the induction seminar that I was emotionally prepared for the experience. I had been to other camps such as Dachau in southern Germany, and surely there would be no sustainable emotional impact for me. I was surely wrong, however, as despite this, as humans we cannot comprehend the thought of 6 million people being killed, 1.1 million deaths which occurred in Auschwitz. As such, I struggled to react. As we were taken to the first block, we were shown numbers and statistics of the different races and people who had died in the camp. It was incredibly emotionless and based in fact, which didn't cause much of a reaction from anyone. This is why, when we came across a pile of suitcases with name tags which had been ripped and taken from people, just as those people had been taken from society, it began to resonate with us, in a way which the rest of the block failed to do. As we progressed through, we saw piles of things such as glasses, shoes, or even walking sticks. Finally, we reached a display that was deoxygenated so that the remains were kept intact as we gazed upon a pile of human hair. Now, many of us may not wear glasses or may not value shoes. We have all, at some point, grown hair, and it is a symbol of our identity. An identity that, for those who entered Auschwitz, was taken away and replaced with numbers as they were degraded to a horrific extent. Thus, the sheer difficulty of seeing what was once a person's living, breathing hair which will have been shaven off or ripped out was far more significant than any statistic. Seeing something as terrifyingly barbaric as that drove some of our group to tears, while others were unable to look at the hair for more than a few seconds. For me, however, it was an incredibly numbing experience. I wasn't able to physically or mentally react to what I saw in that moment, because no matter what words or actions I could have used, they would have not been able to describe how I truly felt. After the next display that is embedded in my memory was a display found at Block 27. In this block, there was a room dedicated to the children who had lived and survived through Auschwitz, with audio of Jewish children playing in the background of the room, and paintings and drawings by those children, of Auschwitz on the covering the room wall to wall. It was here that many of us finally understood that despite the brutality that adults faced, children, the most innocent of our society, had also faced true horror that no one could fully comprehend. A quarter of the Jewish population killed in the Holocaust were 1.5 million children, but again, statistics gave us no idea or picture like the ones on the walls could have. As the exhibit horrified many of us to the core in a way that made many of us grateful for our upbringing. But that made us hope no child would ever have to go through such brutality like that again. After this walk, and before we left to visit Auschwitz II-Birkenau, which served as the main death camp, we were taken to one of the first gas chambers used both in Auschwitz and the Holocaust. As a student of history, I was well aware and educated on the methods that the Nazis used during the horrors of the genocide during the Holocaust. I had both read books and seen photos of the chambers used by the Nazi regime. Despite this, however, and the overwhelming feeling of numbness and in turn stupidity, which turned to stupidity as I thought I understood the brutality that was quickly felt as we were shown the nail marks embedded into the very stonework of the chamber, as people had literally tried to claw to stay alive. This served as a final reminder to me before Birkenau that no matter what I knew, the feeling of horror that was given by Auschwitz was indeed unimaginable, and as such, on the day, after a 3 o'clock start and a 2-hour flight, I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. A short bus journey after this took us to Auschwitz II-Birkenau. Unlike Auschwitz I, there was no stone structures or winding alleyways, but instead a railroad which ran right through the middle of the camp and the guard tower. The open space and wooden huts that covered the surroundings, along with the track, made up the bulk of the ground. The impact of Birkenau as such was different than that of the original camp, as there was no keeping here, no remaining gas chambers as they'd been destroyed, but instead space and a deep unease. As the most vivid memory and feeling that sticks with me, it's not the horror or the numbness that I felt while seeing the exhibits, but instead for me what can only be described as the feeling of death which was present at Birkenau. The feeling that I was standing in a literal hell on earth, where men and women were shot where they stood because they worked cruel hours, only to take a moment to stretch while the Nazis saw this as laxness and killed them. This sense of pain, which the whole compound oozed, made everyone feel incredibly uncomfortable, and was with us from when we got off the bus and is still with us long after we left. After the flight home and a car journey back to my house, where I then unpacked, I eventually crashed onto my bed. However, despite the exhaustion I felt and the need for sleep that I was longing for throughout the day, I could not close my eyes. I struggled to readjust to a routine I had repeated for years, because I still felt so emotionally uneasy and numb. The full understanding of genocide was not so much about the murder of people, but the attempted annihilation of a way of life. The nail marks in the gas chamber, the thought of what those who were sent to Auschwitz had to experience, and all of the experience in general horrified me. This feeling stayed with me for several days and did greatly affect my emotional state. In that time, a close friend of mine was accepted to university, but no matter how hard I tried, I could not feel happy for her, as all I could feel was a numbness which only left me after the follow-up seminar. These are my experiences. They will differ and change from others who go to Auschwitz, through the Holocaust Educational Trust, and from others who went on the trip with me. As such, these have been my thoughts and key moments I picked to best show the emotions that Auschwitz helps to emit, and why it is important historical sites like these exist, and why history is so important to the school curriculum, so that we are able to learn from the past and the next generation are able to try and understand the true horror of genocide. As no matter when people will decide to go to Auschwitz, they are still not experiencing the death camp. What they are experiencing is a memorial 70 years later where it stands. It is not the true horror of genocide or Nazi brutality, but it is the best we can do to honour and remember so we can say, never again.
So a very thank you to Kaylee and Luke for sharing their experiences about their time at Auschwitz. I'm now delighted to welcome Robert McNeil to the stage, who is our keynote speaker.
Hi there. Well, that's a pretty tough act to follow, I have to say, but I'll do my best, and congratulations to all of you for putting on such an amazing production. Thank you. as was said, my name is Robert McNeil, and I worked as a forensic technician in the Balkans back from 1996 until 2001. And I'm not going to read all this out, but I'll let you do that for yourself. But I'd like just to pick up in a couple of points that Srebrenica was one of 6 so-called safe areas that were designated by the UN for Muslims who were being ethnically cleansed throughout Bosnia to find a place of some safety. It didn't do a very good job of it, to be honest with you, because Bosnia is a kind of triangular country that's completely surrounded by Serbia on the one side and Croatia on the other. And so for those that couldn't manage to get out when the war started around 1991-92, they were trapped and ended up being cleansed from their homes and taken to various parts of Bosnia, sometimes to concentration camps, and others left as refugees to try and find somewhere safe. The safe areas, and Srebrenica was one of them, became the most dangerous places in the world, because no sooner had those areas been created, Serbs surrounded them and decided that they would starve the population to death. Srebrenica was a town of 7,000 Muslims that swelled to over 37,000 people, most of whom had nowhere to stay. Now, the protection force from the UN was called UNPROFOR, and that means UN Protection Force. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what that means. The UN didn't have a mandate to protect any people. Their job was to protect humanitarian aid, because if they were to protect one side, they would be accused by the other side of preferring that side and favouring them. And as far as the humanitarian aid was concerned, they didn't do such a great job there either, because the Serbs, bearing in mind that the safe areas were surrounded, they stopped all the aid trucks that were convoys of aid trucks that were going in to these areas, and they claimed 20% of the total amount of goods that were in the trucks. Only for the next point where again it would be stopped by more Serbs, and another 20% of the humanitarian aid would be taken from them. And this would go on until there was hardly any food left for the population of the safe areas, including Srebrenica. And the Serbs were so intent on starving the people that they would even stand on bridges with Kalashnikovs and shoot the rivers in order to kill the fish to prevent them from swimming down towards the towns. So that was the backdrop to Srebrenica. By the time in 1995 the population had reached over 30,000, General Ratko Mladic, who is the Bosnian Serb military commander, decided that he would push the button a wee bit further and invade the town and rid the town of the Muslim population. The population appealed to the UN, the Dutch soldiers that were there, who they believed were there to protect them, but of course they weren't. They couldn't defend them against the Serbs' army, which was huge. And they also took hostages, UN soldiers in various observation points, stripped them of their uniforms, wore those uniforms in order to try and tempt the menfolk of Srebrenica to come to them, where they said they would protect them. So the men were taken, come to that in a minute. Men were taken to the Dutch headquarters, where they were separated from the women and small children. When I say the men, I'm talking about boys from 14 years up to 72 years, where the Serbs had told them that they were potentially soldiers who could kill Serbian soldiers. The men, when you heard about Hassan Hassanovic there running into the hills, the majority of the men tried to escape, ran into the hills where of course the Serbs were waiting for them. And they were taken to fields in buses, and over 8,000 men and boys were murdered from the 11th of July up until around the 15th of July, and that's quite a lot of people to kill. The women were told that the men were going to be okay, that they would be taken to camps for interrogation and questioning to see whether or not they were soldiers. And so they were taken by buses to the next safe area, which was a town called Tuzla, and they waited in vain for the men to arrive, but they never turned up. And so in 1996, I was asked, in my capacity as a forensic technician working for Glasgow University Pathology Department, to volunteer to go out to Bosnia to gather evidence on behalf of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, that's ICTY. And so in spring of 1996, I joined the first team of international forensic specialists to go out there because the UN had discovered that there were disturbed earth in and around Srebrenica, where they guessed that there were mass graves there. And so, as I say, we were sent out there in the spring of 1996. When we arrived there and went out to the first grave, it was empty. There was nothing in it except for a few rags and a few bits of bone and bullet shell casings, etc. And we were puzzled by this until we were told that during that winter between 95 and 96, the Serbs had returned to the graves, knowing that the UN were after them, and they emptied the graves of the bodies of those poor victims. Then, using mechanical diggers, they tore the bodies apart and transported them in trucks further into northern Bosnia and buried the body parts in separate graves, many separate graves, in an attempt to obfuscate what they had done. They thought that they would never ever be able to put those bodies back together again, and for the Muslim population in particular, it was bad enough after learning that their men had been killed. Because of their faith, they wanted their loved ones to be buried whole. And so the Serbs thought that they would get away with it, but they didn't. And this is just a quick sequence of a grave being discovered. You see in the photo on the right that the earth would be gouged out from the side of the hill there, and that would be used as to cover up the bodies. Following that, they would send in dogs to sniff out any explosives, because apart from everything else, the Serbs had planted explosives alongside the bodies or even inside the bodies in an attempt to put off the investigation. And then the crime scene investigators would go in and gather up all the surface evidence, such as bullet casings, etc. Here is a horrible photograph of a mass grave. I can't describe how awful these places are, and I think all of the teams who went out there all together felt that we had to get those poor victims out there and give them a dignified burial. And when I looked into the first grave, I couldn't even make out what I was looking at. I thought I was looking at rags, but in fact, as you focused more closely, you could see signs that there were in fact human beings. This grave, particularly near Srebrenica, was one of the few primary graves, in other words, graves that were filled with whole bodies. And so we then went about the work of carrying out autopsies on the bodies and gathering the evidence that the ICTY needed to catch the perpetrators. The conditions under which we worked, particularly in the early days, were, I have to say, pretty grim. You can see that we didn't even have tables to work on, it was just trestles and a board. Because of the conditions it worked in, I'm afraid that most of the people involved contracted pretty serious illnesses such as dysentery. But we had no other choice. We had to work where we were in places that we were given. And it was quite dangerous at first too, because the Serbs were quite keen, even though the war was supposed to have stopped and it hadn't, they were keen to try and disrupt the work. And here you see a photograph of evidence of execution, where a man has had his hands tied behind his back. The men were also blindfolded. And here you have a photograph of a man in a blindfold where there's an exit site through the blindfold, and another photograph of a skull with a bullet hole exiting the top of his skull, which implied that he was shot under his jaw. X-rays were vitally important because, as I said, that the Serbs would sometimes plant explosives and to try and stop us doing the work, and we found, in a number of occasions, we found hand grenades that had been plunged. Because the bodies had been decomposing all of this time, they were able to plunge explosives inside the bodies in the hope that the work would cease. And in fact, they were to some extent successful, and as soon as anything was found, we had to abandon the work for that day and call in the bomb squad. And here you see an anthropologist piecing together fragments of skull, almost like a 3D jigsaw puzzle. And they would spend hours, sometimes days, doing this in order just to try and establish the entrance or exit site of a bullet. I mentioned that the bodies were torn apart, and sometimes we were dealing with victims whose body parts were in as many as 5 separate graves, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. And we couldn't hand over the bodies to the families until we had a full body, because the last thing that we want is to find another part of a body and go back to the relatives and tell them. So we put the bones aside until eventually we would piece them together. And I knew when I first went out there that this wasn't going to be a job that would be done quickly. In fact, it lasted over 23 years, and to some extent is still going on now. They're still finding mass graves in northern Bosnia. And sometimes artifacts were important that we would find alongside the bodies. And I found this photograph in the shoe, it's the inner sole of a man's shoe that he had folded up to keep hidden from the Serbs who had taken everything from them. And this was important, as all other artifacts were, to try and help identify the victim. Clothing was an extremely important part of the evidence gathering. The clothing that the men wore, they had to wear for 3 years, and the women could recognise minute stitches that they had, repairs that they had made to the clothing because they didn't have any new clothing. And it was impossible for them to be able to identify the bodies, so clothing was the next best thing, even although we couldn't say for certain that the clothing belonged to any particular individual because they may have changed clothing or whatever, so it became secondary evidence, if you like. So we would wash the clothing, examine it, and record all of the findings on the clothing, such as entry or exit wounds. And then, because the women who, as I said, thought that their husbands or sons were in camps, they demanded to know where the men were, and so it was decided that they could come along once a month to look at the clothing to try and identify it as belonging to their loved ones. And these were days that the teams dreaded. because we knew that when the women came into the temporary mortuary to look at this clothing, if they found something, that would to them confirm that their loved ones had been killed. When I retired, I took up painting, and I found it a compulsion to try and paint images that sometimes I had dreams about. Now, I should stress that there were only dreams in which I woke up. The people that suffered the nightmares in reality, what I experienced was nothing compared to that. Anyway, in this particular painting, you can see a Dutch sock, a Bosnian knitted sock. That's to denote that it's for a Muslim sock. A Dutch football top relating to the Dutch soldiers who were there. A pair of youth's pants, a blindfold with a bullet hole in it, and a child's shoe, because I worked not only with the Srebrenica bodies, but with the victims of Marska and Luka camps, and we dealt with every type of injury that you could imagine, and people with vast experience in forensics were shocked, not so much by the numbers, but by the cruelty inflicted upon victims, particularly those in the concentration camps. And this was an attempt by the Serbs to make sure that if those stories got out to the rest of the population, the Muslim population, they would leave. And last year, or 2 years ago, I returned to Bosnia for the first time in a number of years to this place, which is situated in the Dutch UNPROFOR headquarters just outside Srebrenica, where they have built the most beautiful memorial containing 8,500 Muslim victims. Now, the plus side, if there is one in this conflict, was that from a forensic point of view, it was the most successful forensic investigation in history, because out of the 8,500 men in Srebrenica that were murdered, so far 6,500 have been put back together, positively identified, and are buried in this site. On the downside, however, this memorial is, as I said, just sitting outside Srebrenica itself, which was overrun by the Serbs and populated by Serbs. And last year they elected the mayor of Srebrenica, a Serbian genocide denier. And from his window he can see the cemetery, but yet continues to deny that the massacre there ever happened. He said that they were exaggerating the numbers, that all the people that were killed were soldiers fighting in a battle. In the court in The Hague, Radovan Karadzic, the political leader of the Bosnian Serbs, who defended himself on charges of genocide, said that the men who were wearing blindfolds weren't in fact wearing blindfolds when they were shot. They just had headbands that had slipped over their eyes. He couldn't, however, answer the question, but how did they tie their hands behind their backs? He was sentenced to 40 years in prison.
So a very massive big thank you to Mr. McNeil for taking up his time and coming to talk to us about this. So we're coming to the end of the event now, and what we're going to do is I'm going to pass you over to Niamh, who's just going to say a few closing statements, and then, well, that'll be us.
Good afternoon. I'm Niamh Waddle, and I'm a 6th year pupil here at Brace and an ambassador for Rights Respecting Schools. It's my responsibility to close our Holocaust Memorial Day event. I'm sure everyone would agree that BYT have put on an emotional and thought-provoking performance illustrating the genocides of the Holocaust in Srebrenica. Thank you all for your tremendous amount of hard work in bringing the event to life. Thanks also go to Miss Taylor of our drama department and Scott Kerr and Laura of the sound and lighting team. Hearing Kaylee and Luke describe their personal journeys through their experiences as Holocaust Educational Trust ambassadors was especially moving, and many thanks go to Mr. McNeil for being our keynote speaker and explaining his work with the ICTY in Bosnia. Thanks to our janitorial staff who set up the hall and our office staff who printed and photocopied for us. Thanks also go to the Art, English, History and R&PS departments for the work created by our S2 and S3 pupils on the power of words for this event, which can be viewed in the senior social space. And of course, thanks to Miss Malcolm, Faculty Head of Humanities and Coordinator of Brave's Rights Respecting Schools for supporting us in creating and organising this event. The extent of your knowledge of history and your involvement in the Remembering Srebrenica charity has been very helpful in bringing this event together, and although we cannot thank you enough, we hope that this token of appreciation will do. If you'd like to come up. Thanks so much for coming and supporting this event. If you like, there are refreshments in the social area where our Fab Parents group will be happy to serve you. Thank you very much.